Hi, I'm Greg Tom. Welcome to the Community Advocate Podcast. Today we're catching up with Martin Blake, former KPMG chairman and founder of the Groundswell Foundation, which aims to tackle loneliness. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks very much. Great to join you.
No worries. Thanks for taking the time. Firstly, tell us a little bit about your work background. We'll get into what we're here to have a chat, but maybe if you could just give us a little bit about your background to start with.
So I have a background in investment banking, strategy consulting. I have worked in around the world and certainly spent a lot of time in Asia restructuring banks and insurance companies. I served as chairman at KPMG in New South Wales for some 9 years and was at KPMG for 28 years and had various roles in the firm as head of financial services, lead partner for fintech globally and fintech centre in Australia, and on a number of boards. Advanced Committee of Sydney. I was chairman of Sydney University Business School for 9 years too.
But apart from that, not really much in your career then?
No, a few things. And for fun, I race Supermaxes. So I'm a passionate but non-talented sailor.
When you find the time after that pretty impressive roll call. How did you come to create the Groundswell Foundation, and what are its aims?
Well, the Groundswell Foundation was created because sadly my mother passed away in the UK, this in the height of the pandemic, and she died in an NHS hospital. We said goodbye to her on FaceTime. It was pretty heartbreaking, but she died the loneliest person I know in the world, and with no friends in the world. And so for the last 4 years, I've coached the UK Prime Minister's head of media and spokesman for mental health, a very talented Australian called Chloe Westley. So spent a lot of time in number 10 Downing Street. And as a curious mind, I started investigating loneliness and was quite surprised that the UK have had a Minister for Loneliness for over 10 years and a Department for Tackling Loneliness. And it was through those connections in number 10 Downing Street that I was able to connect with the folks who run the Department for Tackling Loneliness in Whitehall and have been at it for 10 years and basically took all that intellectual property and thinking and brought it to Australia as a gift. Now I retired from KPMG 3.5 years ago, and after 28 years, and the CEO, Andrew Yates, who's a very nice man, said, "Marcy, you've done a fantastic job. Is there anything we can do to help you, as you move into your portfolio career?" And I said, "Well, actually, it turns out there is." And helping me write this report on loneliness would be very helpful. So KPMG worked very closely with me to write the report on loneliness, which is called Connections Matter, and which is the most comprehensive report ever produced on loneliness in Australia.
What were some of the main findings of that report? Because I was about to say, how big a problem is loneliness in Australian society, but obviously having done that report, you'd have more of a handle than many people would of the sort of totality of it. What did you find?
Well, we found that 30% of Australians are lonely today, but perhaps more concerning is 50% of young people are lonely, and they are, I guess, in a world of always on social media and digital connectedness, it seems somewhat inconceivable that loneliness could become a health crisis affecting 1 in 3 Australians and 50% of young people. And it's a health priority almost entirely overlooked by both health regulators and providers in Australia, and one that's certainly been exacerbated by COVID-19. And in terms of, there are different cohorts of people most impacted by loneliness. Certainly old people, young people, migrants, LGBTI. They're all groups, and First Nations people are all groups which have much higher levels of problematic loneliness, which is in fact a silent killer, because being lonely is the equivalent to smoking 16 cigarettes a day or having 6 alcoholic drinks a day. In fact, the US Surgeon General produced a report in April last year saying that the loneliness epidemic was a more profound health and social issue than smoking, obesity, and substance abuse in the US, which is quite a significant statement.
That's a hell of a way to put it. I've never quite heard it put in those terms. As you said, the direct cause and effect, comparing it to things like alcohol and smoking and that kind of thing. I've certainly heard, that loneliness is an issue, but directly comparing it like that, makes it even more stark, the impact of loneliness, as you've said. Tell us about your own experience navigating personal loneliness and professional isolation. That's beyond, you touched on your mother's experience. So I'm sorry to hear that was her experience during COVID, but that would have been shared by other people around the world. But you've been through this to some extent yourself in your personal and professional life.
Certainly. I mean, when you have a senior role leading an organisation, it is lonely at the top, because you've got a lot of people that want to connect with you. You've got a lot of people that report into you. People often tell you what you want to hear, and you don't actually get people having candid and real conversations with you. And then my experience from being a senior partner in the firm for 28 years is quite subtle. But when I retired from the firm, which was 3.5 years ago, some people, principally internally partners, think of you as yesterday's newspaper fit for wrapping up tomorrow's fish and chips. So just sort of subtle things: don't return a phone call, not available to catch up for a coffee, all those types of things. So that does certainly make you feel isolated and lonely.
Well, I was just saying, you just touched on that just then, but I was going to say that obviously wouldn't have been something you'd necessarily be expecting, and that many people around the country would go through, perhaps in similar circumstances, like transitioning out and doing something else. But you'd be disappointed when you when you encounter that kind of thing. And I suppose it depends how you deal with it is the issue, isn't it? Like, how you approach the problem.
It is. And it's a lot more pervasive than you think. I mean, if we look at the workforce, I was quite amazed to find out that every day of the year, 10,000 people in the USA reach the age of 65. Now, most of those people continue to work in a business of one, and they contract or get some part-time work, and it's estimated by 2027, over 50% of the workforce in the US are working as a business of one, part of which is because of longevity and their ability to support themselves, because if they don't work, then they sort of be eating cat food in their 70s. So, it's a very Darwinian thing. But if you think, that's over 84 million people in the US working as a business of one. In Australia, a bit more difficult to get the statistics, but it's around 25% of people working as a business of one. And I guess a slingshot that has certainly been COVID, working from home, people reimagining their lives as well, and not working to live, in terms of their reimagined their relationship with work. And there are a lot of people that are interested in having a more balanced lifestyle. So obviously, when you are a business of one, and that's my business now, it tends to be lonelier.
Just as an aside, would you say that working from home phenomenon has been good for addressing loneliness or detrimental? Obviously, it depends on your circumstances. And you mentioned a business of one, it gives you the flexibility. But is it, maybe it's not a question that can't be answered, has it exacerbated the issue because there's a flexibility, but the people aren't mixing as much at the office? Or is it good because it's flexible and, as you say, you can be engaged and continue working to some extent?
Well, I think, yeah, speaking with humans face to face is quite a different experience than, yeah, engaging with people over Teams or on Zoom. And you tend to, yeah, relationships are a contact sport and tends to operate more effectively when you actually have contact with people. And I think that, yeah, staying at home has been a very mixed experience. You know, some people it's really worked well with, but many it hasn't worked well with. And the people it would appear to be most resistant to coming back into the office are really the sort of permafrosted middle management and women, particularly with young children, because they've got lots more flexibility with work. The problem is that despite all the efforts to improve diversity and gender diversity in the workforce, you know, Australia is still principally run by stale pale males, and as a unconscious bias, if you've got a young person that you engage with and you come up with an idea, you might say to that young person, maybe you could help me on that idea. Now, there may be a mum at home who's, you know, balancing home life and everything, who is, yeah, there's unconscious bias there with directing opportunities for people that you see physically. That's a human phenomenon. And so I think that does exacerbate some of the challenges with loneliness.
What sort of wins has the foundation chalked up since you've been up to speed in terms of addressing loneliness? I was reading that there's a parliamentary inquiry that was kicked off. What are some of the successes you've had in, and it's a long game, I imagine, this kind of thing.
So just to give you some context for the parliamentary inquiry, so I met with Tracy Crouch, who's now Dame Tracy Crouch, who's the inaugural Minister for Loneliness, that chairs a joint parliamentary committee in the House of Commons for the UK on loneliness and connected communities. And I said to her about 2.5 years ago, what's the one thing, Tracy, that I could do that could really shift the dial on loneliness? And she said, without question, it's to set up a bipartisan parliamentary inquiry into loneliness that circumvents the political cycle, because that will be a catalyst to bring people together that are all doing grassroots things in the community around to tackle loneliness. And it will be a great opportunity for the government to step in at a state level, to positively tackle loneliness in local communities. And so, I was really delighted that after a couple of years of lobbying, the New South Wales government announced a parliamentary inquiry into loneliness on the 8th of August. And in fact, submissions are due by the 1st of November into that inquiry. And both Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, and the Minister for Mental Health, Rose Jackson, are both committed to make this a springboard to ensure there's positive action to tackle loneliness in the communities.
And I was going to say, what are some of the things that you would like to see happen in this country, but this is front and centre? Do you think this is the sort of pointy edge that we need something like this to happen?
Yeah, well,
and then other things will hopefully flow from it.
Yeah. So the first thing is evidence-based research. So most of the research in the world around loneliness is really enjoying the problem. There are this many people lonely, they're lonely because of X, Y, and Z. There's very little evidence-based research on what are the most effective actions, remedies for tackling loneliness. So I'm delighted that we're funding the first evidence-based research on what are the most effective interventions with young people in urban and rural areas to tackle loneliness. That's been done by Dr. Brock Bastian, who is a professor at Melbourne University, and that's the first evidence-based research of its kind to inform public policy and what's going to be most effective, certainly with young people. So providing an ecosystem to ensure that all research is shared in open source is a very important role that the government can play. Raising awareness of loneliness is also very important, and I guess when I started on this campaign some 3.5 years ago, there was very little awareness of loneliness. There was a little read about it, but now in the news and certainly social media, there's a lot more articles, and in particular, a number of prominent individuals talking about their lived experience of loneliness, so raising awareness. Of course, there is a big stigma associated with loneliness. There's been some fantastic work done on raising awareness of mental health issues the last 20 years. And if I ring up work and say, I've had a really difficult weekend, feeling very blue, the chances are my boss would say, well, that's fine, Martin, here's the employee help support line, please give them a ring, take some time and just let us know how you're going. And if I rang up work and said, I've had a tough weekend, I was feeling really lonely, people would raise their eyebrows at that. Now, loneliness is an epidemic, and the challenge is particularly with young people, because if 50% of young people are lonely, they're connected but disconnected over devices, then that is a prerequisite catalyst for much more serious mental health issues and, of course, suicidal ideation, etc. So to capture this early is very important. The final thing is impact, and we're working with organisations and actively supported them to have a positive impact in the world on loneliness. So the 3 organisations in particular that we're focused on working with: Rally Forever, which uses the convening power of a tennis court to bring people from different backgrounds together to build meaningful social connections. And that's extremely important in terms of, for not just, for positively tackling loneliness in communities, particularly with vulnerable people. The second one is Rally Forever. It is Heart on My Sleeve, which is run by a chap called Mitch Wallace, who's really trying to encourage people to talk about their feelings and have real conversations with each other to surface issues around loneliness and mental health issues. And he's a great advocate for that. Just recently written a new book called Real Conversations, which is really important for both raising awareness with loneliness and mental health issues, but also articulating positive ways to actually address it. And then the Harrison Riddell Foundation is a foundation we support, which basically helps young Australians access the support at the right time with their app that they've developed called Your Crew. And astonishingly, the average time in Australia from the onset of mental health issues to receiving help is actually 11 years. And their mission is to reduce 11 years to 24 hours. So we're supporting them. So very much grassroots things that we're trying to do in the community.
And I know you recently had the charitable ball to help
Yes.
raise funds. How did that go? Was it you were happy with how that?
Yeah, it was a huge success. I mean, the timing of it was to try and coincide it with the parliamentary inquiry to really raise awareness. We had 30 corporates had tables there, and so we had representation from different parts of the business and local community. We had the CEO of Lifeline there, Colin Seary, who, Lifeline do an amazing job in terms of providing frontline support for Australians. And in fact, they receive over 1.5 million calls a year from Australians, and a disproportionate number of those calls, up to 70% of those calls, are connected with loneliness. They're not necessarily crisis calls, which is really what the original mandate for Lifeline was set up to do. We also had Brand Black, who is the CEO of the Business Council Australia, that represents the CEOs of the top 150 corporations in Australia. And we had senior people from across the public sector, for not-for-profits and corporates and professional services firms as well.
I'm glad it went so well. That's a pretty good roll call and a good level of support, for the cause, as you've just outlined. And like that stat with Lifeline, that's right. It's interesting how this has perhaps changed over the years since they first set up, and the recognition of these sorts of problems like loneliness and the impact that they're truly having here. That gap of 11 years, getting it down to 24 hours, like, it's a great aim, because 11 years is obviously way too long, for people to have help for this kind of thing. Look, thanks, Martin, for those informed insights on what's a very important issue in society that many people are struggling to address, and also, sharing some of your personal background. Like you said, I agree, the more people can talk about it openly and share and have honest discussions about this kind of thing, the more, chance are that we could actually, work together to address these issues and have better outcomes, I think. So good luck with everything that you're doing in this area. Thanks for joining us, and catch us again next time on the Community Advocate podcast. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.